You're a loser, Nathaniel. Charles Whitmore's voice carried across the kitchen, sharp and deliberate, every word emphasized like a slap. He waved his coffee mug in the air, conducting an orchestra of insults only he could hear. My daughter deserves better. My name is Nathaniel Brooks, and I'm 39 years old. I've spent the last 12 years building a private equity firm in Austin, Texas. Ironclad Capital Partners, making investments that most people never see coming. I work through shell companies, anonymous trusts, holding firms that keep my name buried in paperwork so deep that even the sharpest attorneys take months to trace it back to me. That's the way I like it: clean, invisible, powerful. But right now, standing in my father-in-law's kitchen, watching him swagger around as though he owned the air I breathed, I felt anything but powerful. Charles Whitmore had been calling me worthless for 3 straight years. Every family dinner, every holiday, every time I walked through his front door. She could have married Dr. Pierce's son, he continued, gesturing toward my wife, Sophia. His mug tilted dangerously, a brown drop of coffee sliding down its rim. But no, she picked you, a man who won't even tell us what he really does for a living. Sophia sat at the breakfast table, her fork scraping idly against the porcelain as she stirred her scrambled eggs around and around her plate. She never looked up, never said a word, just kept moving those eggs like they contained the answer to everything broken between us. Nathaniel works in finance, Dad, she finally mumbled, still not meeting my eyes. Finance? Charles scoffed. You know what that means? Nothing. Could be selling insurance for all we know. Could be managing retirement accounts in some dingy strip mall. I watched him pace around his granite-topped kitchen island, his polished loafers clicking softly against the tile, his face getting redder with each circuit. This was Charles Whitmore, founder and chief executive officer of Evopharm Biotech, a struggling biotech company that hadn't turned a real profit in 4 years. He had inherited a fortune from his father's construction empire and believed that entitled him to call himself a financial genius. What Charles didn't know was that I had been tracking his company's financial statements for 8 months. Evopharm was hemorrhaging cash, burning through what little venture capital they had left. They needed a miracle. They needed exactly the kind of faceless investor that I specialized in being. You sit there like a mute, Charles barked, stabbing his finger toward my chest. Real men speak up. Real men defend themselves. I nodded slowly. You're right, Mr. Whitmore. The kitchen went silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint scrape of Sophia's fork against her plate. She finally looked up, confusion flickering in her eyes. Even Charles seemed caught off guard by my response. I am right, he said, but his voice lacked its usual iron certainty. Absolutely, I replied, standing and sliding my arms into my jacket. Sophia does deserve better. I turned and walked toward the front door, feeling both pairs of eyes burning into my back. My hand reached for the brass handle. Behind me, a chair screeched against the hardwood as Sophia stood abruptly. Nathaniel, wait. But I was already outside, exhaling the cold November air, knowing with absolute clarity that everything was about to change. I met Sophia 5 years ago at a medical technology conference in Boulder. She was presenting research on gene therapy applications, articulate, passionate, her eyes alight with the fire of someone who truly believed in her work. I was there because I'd been scouting investments in the biotech sector. What I didn't expect was to fall for the presenter. Our relationship moved quickly. Too quickly, probably. Within 18 months, we were married in a modest ceremony at a small church outside the city. Charles Whitmore complained about it for weeks. He wanted something grander, more expensive, something worthy of parading before his country club acquaintances. But Sophia and I preferred simple things. Or at least I thought we did. The cracks started showing during our very first Christmas as husband and wife. Charles had too much wine and began interrogating me about my work. I gave him the same vague answers I always gave people: private investments, portfolio management, consulting for high-net-worth individuals. All of it technically true, but carefully omitting the crucial detail that I was the high-net-worth individual. My firm, Ironclad Capital Partners, managed more than $200 million in assets. We specialized in early-stage investments in technology and medical companies, deals that demanded discretion and anonymity. I had built my reputation by staying invisible, letting others claim the spotlight while I quietly collected returns that most investors couldn't dream of. Charles, however, saw my discretion as weakness. He began making comments about my mystery job and how a real man would be more transparent about his career. Sophia would laugh awkwardly, change the subject, or smooth things over, but she never told him to stop. Never defended me. Over time, the verbal jabs escalated. Charles would sneer about my clothes, my car, my supposed lack of ambition. He'd compare me to other men in their social circle, successful doctors and attorneys who drove German cars and spoke loudly about their accomplishments. What made it worse was watching Sophia diminish during those confrontations. The confident scientist I had married grew quiet and apologetic, forever excusing her father's behavior instead of challenging it. After particularly brutal dinners, she would pull me aside and whisper apologies, promising it would get better. But she never once confronted him directly. 3 months ago, I stumbled across something that changed everything. While researching potential investments in the biotech sector, I came across the funding documents for Evopharm Biotech. The company was in serious trouble. They were burning through cash faster than they could raise it. They had approached dozens of venture capital firms, but their debt-to-revenue ratio was so alarming that most serious investors walked away without a second thought. That's when I realized I had a choice to make. I could step in, quietly, through the faceless machinery of shell corporations and trusts, and rescue Charles Whitmore's company. Or I could let it sink. The businessman in me saw the potential upside. The son-in-law in me saw something else entirely. So I began the due diligence process, hiding my involvement behind layers of corporate veils. Charles would never know that his salvation was sitting at his own dinner table, listening to his insults, watching his daughter stay silent. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago, at Sophia's birthday dinner. We were at Charles' house. Had invited his brother-in-law, Dr. Jonathan Pierce, a cardiac surgeon with a fondness for bragging about his vacation home in Florida. Jonathan just bought a new boat, Charles announced loudly as Sophia cut into her birthday cake. 40 feet. Cost him more than most people earn in 5 years. Jonathan laughed and clapped me on the shoulder. What about you, Nathaniel? Any big purchases lately? A new car? Maybe a house on the coast? I should have seen it coming. Charles' eyes lit up with that predatory gleam I'd come to recognize over the years. Nathaniel doesn't make those kinds of purchases, Charles said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. He's more of a practical man, aren't you, Nathaniel? Beneath the table, Sophia squeezed my hand, a silent plea to stay calm. But Charles wasn't finished. I mean, let's be honest here, he said, spreading his hands wide as though addressing a courtroom. My daughter is a brilliant scientist. She's published in major journals, speaks at international conferences. She could have married anyone, a doctor, a lawyer, someone with real ambition. Instead, she settled for. His hand flicked vaguely in my direction. Well, we all make mistakes. The room fell silent. Sophia's hand went limp in mine. Jonathan studied his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. Charles leaned back in his chair, satisfied, waiting for me to break. I looked at Sophia. Really looked at her. She was staring at her lap, her face flushed. Not with outrage at her father's cruelty, but with embarrassment for me. And that's when I understood. This was never going to get better. Sophia wasn't going to defend me. Because deep down, some part of her agreed with him. I stood slowly, placed my napkin on the table, and looked Charles in the eye. You're absolutely right, I said. She does deserve better. I kissed Sophia lightly on the forehead, grabbed my coat, and walked out. Behind me, I heard her voice crack, calling my name. But I didn't turn back. I had work to do. The drive home that night gave me too much time to think. For months, I had been preparing investment documents for Evopharm Biotech, a $15 million funding package that would save Charles' company and secure his retirement. The paperwork was ready. All it needed was my signature. I pulled into my driveway, sat in the car for 10 long minutes, and made my decision. I wasn't going to sign those documents. In fact, I was going to do something much more satisfying. I was going to let Charles Whitmore learn exactly what it felt like to need someone he had spent years calling worthless. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Andrew Fletcher, and asked him to draft 3 documents. The first, a formal withdrawal of investment interest in Evopharm Biotech. The second, a notice of contract termination for the pending funding agreement. And the third, a confidentiality release that would allow me to reveal my identity as the anonymous investor. Are you absolutely sure about this, Nathaniel? Andrew asked during our meeting. You've spent months on due diligence. From a purely financial perspective, the investment fundamentals are sound. Despite the family politics. I'm sure, I told him. Sometimes the best investment is the one you don't make. By noon, everything was in place. Andrew would deliver the withdrawal notice to Evofarm at exactly 10 a.m. the following morning. I wanted Charles to have a full day to panic before he understood what had really happened. That evening, Sophia came home around 8 o'clock. She had been staying at her sister's place since the birthday dinner, and I could see from the redness around her eyes that she'd been crying. We need to talk, she said, sitting stiffly in the chair across from me in the living room. Okay, I said. My dad called me today, she continued. He thinks he went too far the other night. I almost laughed. Worried? That was his idea of remorse? He wants to apologize, Sophia said. Maybe we could have dinner this weekend, just the three of us. Start fresh. I studied her face, searching for even the slightest hint that she understood what had really happened. But she was still framing it as a matter of wounded pride, of harsh words. She had no idea that her father had just insulted the one man who held the key to his company's survival. Sophia, I said carefully, how long have you been ashamed of me? The question hit her like a slap. What? I'm not ashamed of you. You've never once told your father to stop insulting me. Not once in 3 years. He doesn't mean it. He's just protective. He called me worthless trash in front of your entire family. And you said nothing. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know what to say. He gets so angry when people confront him. So you chose his comfort over my dignity. That's not fair. But it was fair. And she knew it. Sophia had made her choice long ago. Every silence, every excuse, each one had been a decision to side with her father instead of me. I love you, she said finally, her voice trembling. I know you do, I said. But love isn't enough when you want fight for it. She left an hour later. And I knew, deep down, that she wasn't coming back. Not really. Even if we stayed married. Even if we tried counseling. There would always be a part of her that looked at me and saw her father's version of me, a man unworthy of her. The next morning, I arrived at my office early. At exactly 10 a.m., Andrew Fletcher called to confirm the withdrawal notice had been delivered to Evofarm Biotech. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. Nathaniel? Sophia's voice shook. Something's happened. Dad's company just lost their major investor $15 million. He's completely unraveling. I'm sorry to hear that, I said evenly. The lawyers won't tell him who pulled out. They said it was an anonymous investment group, but now they're claiming breach of confidentiality terms. Dad's talking about bankruptcy. Nathaniel, do you think? Could you maybe ask around? See if anyone knows who this investor is? The irony was too perfect. She was asking me to help find the investor, not knowing that I was the one. I'll see what I can do, I told her. After I hung up, I drafted 2 text messages and scheduled them for delivery the following morning. One to Sophia. One to Charles. Both would arrive at exactly 10 a.m., along with a confirmation from Andrew. By tomorrow afternoon, they would know exactly who they had been dealing with. That evening, I reviewed Evofarm's files one last time. What I found confirmed everything I had suspected. Charles had ignored his own scientists, overruled data with arrogance, and pushed forward a failed product launch that cost the company nearly $3 million. And the worst part? Sophia had been one of the scientists who warned him not to move forward. She had written a 20-page report explaining why the compound wasn't ready. Charles dismissed her as overly cautious. When her prediction proved correct, he blamed her anyway and made her work environment so unbearable that she finally quit. Sophia never told me the full story. She described it as differences over priorities. But the truth was clear now. Charles had sabotaged her career just as surely as he tried to sabotage me. The next morning at 9:45, I called Sophia. Nathaniel, what's going on? I need to tell you something important, I said. But I want you to sit down first. You're scaring me. I'm the anonymous investor who pulled out of Evofarm. Silence. 30 seconds of absolute silence. What? My firm, Ironclad Capital Partners, was prepared to invest $15 million in your father's company. I withdrew the offer yesterday. That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. You're in portfolio management. Sophia, I own Ironclad Capital. We manage over 200 million. I've been the investor your father has been chasing for 8 months. Her breathing turned quick and shallow. This has to be a joke. Check your phone, I said. In 15 minutes, you'll get a message from me confirming everything. So will your father. Nathaniel, if this is true, why didn't you ever tell me? Because I didn't need you to know. And because I wanted to see how your family treated someone they thought was beneath them. So this was some sort of test. No. It was going to be an investment right up until your father called me worthless trash in front of everyone, and you stayed silent. Sophia started crying. I should have defended you. I know that. But please, Nathaniel, this is my father's life. His company. You can't destroy it because your feelings were hurt. This isn't about feelings, I said coldly. It's about respect. And consequences. At exactly 10 a.m., my phone buzzed. Both messages had been delivered. Sophia's phone buzzed too. Oh my God, she whispered. Nathaniel. Please. I'm begging you. Don't destroy my father. I'm not destroying him, Sophia. I'm letting him live with the consequences of his own choices. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Charles. He was screaming before I could even answer. You bastard. You think this is funny? You think you can wreck my company just because I hurt your feelings? Mr. Whitmore, I said calmly, I think you've misunderstood the situation. I've misunderstood nothing. Sophia told me everything. You're the investor. You're the one who pulled out. That's correct. 23 people work for me, Nathaniel. 23 families depend on this company. And you're willing to destroy all of them because of a few words? Actually, Mr. Whitmore, I'm willing to let your company succeed or fail on its own merits without my money propping it up. We had a deal. He shouted. We had a preliminary agreement, I corrected. One I chose not to sign. No laws were broken. No contracts violated. Silence. When Charles spoke again, his voice was smaller, almost pleading. What do you want? There has to be something. Money? An apology? Nothing, Mr. Whitmore. I don't want anything from you. Then why? Because I want you to know what it feels like to need someone you've always considered worthless. And then I hung up. I turned off my phone. It was over. 3 days later, Sophia filed for divorce. She came to the house while I was at work, packed her belongings, and left only a letter on the kitchen counter. It was 2 pages long, but the message was simple. She couldn't stay married to a man who would deliberately hurt her family. What she didn't mention was that she also cut off all contact with Charles. I learned this from Dr. Vanessa Cole, who heard it from another former Evofarm employee. According to Vanessa, Sophia had confronted her father about how he treated me, and when Charles tried to justify his behavior, she finally told him exactly what she thought about his reckless business decisions, his mistreatment of his research staff, and his years of verbal abuse. Vanessa said the conversation ended with Sophia telling her father that he had destroyed her marriage and her career, and that she never wanted to see him again. Charles called her 17 times after that. She didn't answer once. Within a week, word of Evofarm's financial crisis had spread through the biotech community. 2 more potential investors pulled out, spooked by the company's debt ratio and the sudden disappearance of their lead funder. Charles was forced to lay off 8 employees and close one of Evofarm's research facilities. The local business journal ran a story on the company's decline, highlighting the mysterious withdrawal of their primary investor. Charles refused to comment, but several former employees painted a bleak picture of poor leadership and failed strategy. By the end of the month, Charles had put his house on the market and was liquidating his personal investments to keep the company afloat. The country club membership was gone. The vacation home in Vermont was gone. Everything was being sold just to buy a little more time. One afternoon, I drove past his house. He was in the yard, on his knees, pulling weeds from the garden that his landscaping service used to handle. He looked older. Smaller. Like a man who had finally run out of people to blame. 6 months later, I received word that Evofarm Biotech had declared bankruptcy. Charles managed to sell off a few of their research assets, but the company itself was gone. The remaining employees were either laid off or absorbed into the acquiring firm. Charles himself had taken a job as a consultant for a larger biotech company, working out of a small office in a strip mall near the airport. The man who once lectured me endlessly about ambition and success was now commuting to the kind of anonymous office space he used to mock. Sophia never reached out to me directly. But through mutual friends, I learned she had accepted a position at a research institute in California. She was doing well publishing papers, speaking at conferences again. She had found her voice in science, even if she had never found it in our marriage. I sold the house in Austin and moved to Portland, Oregon, where I opened a new office for Ironclad Capital Partners. The change of scenery suited me. The Pacific Northwest had a thriving tech community, full of opportunities to invest in. I never heard from Charles again. But I didn't need to. The business journals kept me informed of his decline, every failed venture, every missed opportunity, every time another investor passed him over because of his reputation for arrogance and poor judgment. Charles Whitmore had finally learned what it felt like to be dismissed, ignored, and considered worthless by the very people who held his future in their hands. He discovered that respect isn't something you can demand or inherit. It's something you earn through how you treat others, especially those you believe can't fight back. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting someone face the natural consequences of their own character. And sometimes, the most worthless person in the room turns out to be the one holding all the power. And now I ask you, if you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have signed the papers and saved Charles Whitmore's company? Or would you have let him taste the bitter medicine of his own arrogance, just as I did? The story may be over, but the question remains.